So the action operator discussion was pretty fast because there wasn't a whole lot to say about do on next. Let's take a look at something that's a little bit more interesting and definitely more sophisticated. You'll see that there's a whole category of operators in Project Reactor and RxJava called combining operators. And as the name suggests, they're used to combine things together. And you can often use them to create a flux from multiple iterations or multiple sources or so on and so forth. There's other ways of having combining operators we'll talk about later as well. So we're going to focus here on the repeat and mergeWith operators, which are kind of interesting. So let's talk about the repeat operator first. That returns a flux that repeats the sequence of items that are emitted by the given flux a certain number of times. And that number of times is designated here by this long parameter. So this will go ahead and repeat things. It returns a new Flux instance, and that Flux instance will, of course, be the results of having the thing called num repeat times. This particular method does not operate by default on any given scheduler. So what that means is that whatever scheduler context it's called in, that's the scheduler it's going to use in order to carry out its operations. So let's take a look at a simple example. So here we're going to go ahead and have a flux. And this is kind of interesting. You'll notice here that we're going to use the from method so we can make this thing run dynamically. So it'll be bound at runtime as opposed to bound at assembly time. And inside of this, we're going to go ahead and generate a random big fraction. And we're going to do this 3 times. So we're going to go ahead and generate this thing multiple times. So this will generate it once, and then repeat causes that operation to be called n times, doing the randomness each time. There's also a repeat operation that's part of RxJava that works pretty much the same way. And there is nothing really in Java streams that works like this. The next operator is a little bit more interesting and comes in very handy in a lot of situations. It's called mergeWith. And what it does is it takes the data that's emitted by a flux, and then it takes a publisher, and it will merge the 2 emitted sequences or streams into a merged sequence. And I'll show you some examples. The parameter that's passed to this is a publisher to merge with, and a publisher is just something that can emit events. Like a flux would be another example of a publisher. You can have other things besides fluxes. And it returns the new merged Flux instance. So it takes all the stuff from the flux it's calling mergeWith and all the stuff that's emitted by this publisher, and it combines them together. So what you end up with is something that looks like a single flux, which is really the merger of 2 fluxes. So here's an example where we would have flux F1 initialized somehow, flux F2 initialized somehow, and then we say F1 merge with F2, and that'll return a new flux that's the merger of those other 2 fluxes. Now, the interesting thing about mergeWith is the merging of the fluxes might interleave the items. So, for example, if we have one flux that has green, yellow, and blue, which are just stand-ins for values or types, values really, and we have another flux that has sort of orange and purple or whatever colors you see those to be, then if you call mergeWith, it very well might interleave them to look like this. Or not. And that's the tricky part. Really, the conditions under which it'll merge stuff largely depends on whether you're using concurrency or not. If you're not using concurrency, it may do an append as opposed to an interleave. If for some reason you really, really, really want to make sure you never end up with interleaving, even if you start using concurrency, then you want to use the concat_with operator instead of the mergeWith operator. So concat_with will avoid interleaving. So it'll put all the items in the first source ahead of the ones that come after that you merge or you concat with. RxJava has something that's pretty much identical to this called mergeWith. And both of these operators are somewhat along the same lines as Java Stream's concat operation. And here's a really fun little helper method I wrote at one point to show how you can concatenate stuff using streams. So here we have a list L, and we want this list to be concatenated together n times. And using streams, we say, make me an empty stream, and then while we haven't iterated through this thing down to 0, take the existing stream which is empty initially, and concatenate the list at the end of it, making a new stream, and keep doing that until we end up with the final result, and then take that stream S and collect it into a list. So just fun with streams, illustrating how you can do something like merge with a stream. This is really more like concat with, but same kind of idea. OK, so that's the end of the overview of combining operators in the Flux class.